Good afternoon, distinguished delegates, friends, colleagues, and other delegates and attendees. Welcome to the Asian Babylonian Hearing and Opportunity in Berlin. My name is Irene Jidako Abdullah. I'm about to conduct one project in Russia. And then I have the honor to actually host this session. This session is about marking the release of the survey report on reforming the COP re-electrification process. This is an initiative by Professor Rafa, former COP13 president, and also supported by partners including IUSDR, University of Indonesia, and also the Climate Well Project Indonesia. The survey gathered insight from negotiators, academics, civil societies, and practitioners across different regions, and focusing on how the COP process can evolve to meet the urgency of today's climate challenge. Let me begin by sharing the core findings. The survey builds on the series of dialogues initiated by Professor Rahmatullah, former COP president, who noted that while COP process have grown larger and more visible, but they do not always translate into concrete reform. The 2021 survey collected diverse perspectives and also explored 6 major reform themes. The first one would be sharper proposed obstruction. A strong call for COP to move beyond ceremonial speeches to move into a more mechanism that drives implementation. Let us propose separately negotiations, high-level political sanctions, and also exhibition for sharper focus. Secondly, it also highlights the strength of regional coordination. Structure regional signal processes with a clear mandate and support could spell and also speed up the process of negotiating and amplify global south process priorities. Thirdly, on rebuilding trust. Trust remains one of the most important and one of the most fragile aspects of elements of the climate diplomacy. Predictable finance, transparent reporting, and also continuous engagement beyond annual conflict are essential. Fourthly, looking on climate finance and accountability. Finance bottleneck remains the biggest challenge. The biggest obstacles. Respondents want annual tracking, independent review, and stronger measurable finance mechanism. Fifth, inclusion of non-state actors, civil society, youth, indigenous people, private sectors, and academia already drive real challenges. And we are driving real climate action. But yet, it's generate a referral to formal negotiation. Many proposed advisory partners and also panels for sharing mechanism and also vision that improve and roles institutionalized by the people. And lastly, it is from a practice feedback. The world wants stronger national accountability, clear indicators, and measurable outcomes to close the gap between promises and real impact. The message is clear. The COP must evolve from story to delivery. And to help us unpack these findings from a science and governance perspective, I would like to welcome Professor Dr. Nitna Supriyanta, Chief Chairman of the ISPR University of Indonesia. Professor, what is it?
Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm Yana Suryana. I'm the chairman of the Institute for Sustainable Earth and Resources in Universitas Indonesia. It's a pleasure to be part of this important session. I would like to begin by appreciating Professor Rahmat Ditullah for initiating this survey and for continuing the series of discussion on COP's reform that several of us has joined since 2003. These conversations help us reflect on how the COP's process can become more relevant, more effective, more inclusive in driving year-round climate action. Ladies and gentlemen, the finding of this survey are honest and insightful. They saw that while the COP has grown in scale and feasibilities, it has not always delivered the impact people expected. The process remains vital, but it must evolve from ceremonial gathering to a platform deliver measurable results. Ladies and gentlemen, many participants in the reform in this survey agree that COP should focus more on practical cooperation, regional action, and continuous progress rather than waiting for breakthrough once a year. In other words, climate diplomacy must stay connected to the science and the people who live with its consequences every day. So, what is the role of science and knowledge? One strong theme in the reform dialogues is the central role of science. I'm scientist, so that's why I believe that central role of this is science. Evidence should remain the foundation of all climate decisions. Science provides clarity in a field often clouded by competing interests. It tells us what works, what does not work, and where the risks truly lie. But science cannot stand from societies. It must engage with communities, business, and the policy makers. In Indonesia, many solutions have emerged from combining research, local wisdom, practical innovations. As academics, we are part of the survey called non-state actors, groups that operate outside formal negotiation but contribute essential knowledge and integrity to the process. Inclusion of non-external private sector is very important. The survey clearly highlights that non-state actors, civil society, youth, indigenous communities, local government, academia, and the private sector play critical roles in achieving climate goals. Yes, their contribution often remain in the sidelines of the official negotiation. This group are already taking concrete action, setting emission target, indigenous people protecting forests, companies investing in renewable energy, university gathering data, and young people mobilizing communities. The COP process to recognize this part of the collective global effort. Respondents in the survey suggested steps such as establishing advisory panels for sharing arrangement and decision tracking goals for non-state actors. These ideas could make the process more transparent and accountable. The private sector, in particular, bring technology, finance, and innovation. When guided by clear sustainability standard, it become more major driver solution rather than part of the problem. Another point that emerged from the reform discussion is the importance of regional collaborations. Climate system and ecosystem do not follow regional border. Forest fires, ocean current, and biodiversity loss link our fate together. Regional reforms can ensure that commitment made in the COPs translate into continuous work throughout the years. In Asia Pacific, we already see promising cooperation in biodiversity conservation, blue carbon restoration, and biodiversity link forces fit together. Regional reforms can also the commitment made with the translated to continuous work together. In closing, here in Bell, we are surrounded by the Amazon, one of the world's greatest ecosystems, and reminding what is stakes. Reforming the form is not about changing the values or schedule. It's about reform, about renewing purpose. If government, scientists, business, and community can work together, so true partners, the COP can once again become a space where ideas turn into action. Science gave us direction, and stone actor gave us momentum. Together, they can make the progress more human, more grounded, and more effective. Thank you very much.
And we appreciate Professor Jiang. Next, we will hear an international perspective on transparency, participation, and equity. I would like to know Ethan Spanner, International Policy Advisor for the Climate Reality Project Global. Ethan, for you.
This is on? It's on. Okay. I'm going to stay seated if that's okay with you. And I thank you for the work on the survey, for having me here, for publicizing this important topic. I'm going to talk about something that maybe is a gap that wasn't asked about in the survey, but is I think a crucial aspect of reform of the COP process, which is the role of the COP president in pushing forward ambition, pushing forward participation, and making for a more fair and equitable process. So the COP president is really the shepherd of multilateralism in this process. They are the one who is tasked with taking decisions forward. And if you look at what in the rules of procedure a COP president is actually tasked with doing, it's really just that, carrying forward the session. But it has grown over time, over the years, into much, much more than that. And a COP president is now expected to take forward an action agenda, to host a pre-COP diplomatic calendar of meetings, to oversee mandated and non-mandated events, to do reports, to, at the end of the day, help get together a cover decision if that's necessary or desired. And that's a huge process in and of itself, finding the balance, finding the buy-in for a cover decision. So all of that is to say that when a country comes forward and raises their hand and says, I would like to host COP, they are undertaking a huge responsibility, and one that they do not and should not take lightly. I think we need to be clear about what a presidency can and cannot do. They can't determine who can and cannot be part of a COP and attend a COP. They cannot set their own rules of procedure or establish mandates that are beyond what they've already been given. But what they can do is manage the diplomacy and manage the pieces outside and around the COP that have become such a big part of this. We're looking around right now at the pavilions, and like I said, the action agenda, et cetera. But what this means is that role of the presidency and the power of the presidency has ratcheted up over time. And it's established through a series of norms. You're expected to do a number of things as a COP president that 10 years ago you weren't expected to do. You were merely expected to carry the session forward. So at this crucial point in time, we at Climate Reality have thought about a framework for what a COP president should do, how they should conduct themselves, how they should set up their overseeing of this process. So first of all, a couple of things on substance alone. A COP president should be part of a country, or should be a country that has put forward its highest possible ambition in its NDC and has met the climate finance requirements that it has already committed to. This helps build trust. This helps move the process forward towards the ultimate objectives of the convention and the Paris Agreement. And they are now, in fact, legally encouraged to do so, or at least legally advised to do so by the International Court of Justice through their advisory opinion on climate change. Another substantive thing, they should really shepherd forward implementation of the transition away from fossil fuels. This was a huge commitment. It needs to be balanced with finance, with adaptation, with other means of implementation. But that is an important role that a presidency now must take forward. They have a series of commitments that have been placed upon them that they need to take forward. That's chief among them. Some things on process. It's important for a COP president to put forward a process that is maintaining or primarily focused on implementation at this point. We've seen this all throughout this COP. Brazil has done it by centering the action agenda as part of implementation. I appreciate quite a bit the work that the Brazilian presidency has done to push forward some of these reforms. So implementation should be key. Next is a big one and a very contentious one, but we think that a presidency should shepherd forward a process to start considering formal adoption of the rules of procedure with supermajority voting in instances where consensus cannot be found. And I realize some would say that's impossible. It's certainly very difficult politically, but it removes that power of a few fossil fuel interested states to really veto progress. Which brings me to my next and main point when we talk about fossil fuels is that the role of outside interest influence must also align with the objectives of the convention and the Paris Agreement. Not just the presidency, not just the parties, but the outside interest role must also align with those objectives. So there are a few viable steps that a presidency can take to encourage that. Not fix it completely, but encourage it to be sure. And again, this sets precedent. This would say, if you can do this, if Brazil can do this, if next year's COP president could do this, if Ethiopia the year after could do this, the presidents that follow subsequently would be expected to do it as well. It provides an advocacy hub for civil society to hold them accountable. So what are some of these things? A COP presidency staff should not contain fossil fuel representatives, nor should the delegation of the host country. This is, again, a way for a country to establish trust that they are taking this process forward towards the ultimate objectives. It should commit to using its diplomatic engagement before COP only to progress towards the objectives of the convention and the Paris Agreement, not to advance their own geopolitical interests as they relate to fossil fuels. They shouldn't be making fossil fuel deals, in other words, and this has happened in the past. It should maintain a strong conflict of interest policy that blocks sponsorships from fossil fuel companies and also blocks contracts with entities that may find that they have a conflict of interest. So maybe we make a contract with a company. One of their main clients is fossil fuel industry or a series of fossil fuel companies. That's a conflict of interest right there. And what that entity is expected to deliver on the contract with the COP president. We should have a conflict of interest policy against those. So what I've talked about is exclusion at this point. And we also need to look at the other side of the coin. How does a COP presidency promote inclusion? The role of science that we just heard about is, I think, paramount among those. Things like the head of state summit should have carved out space for all heads of state to hear the latest science throughout the COP process and the negotiations throughout the 2 weeks. Science should be centered, and continuously we should come back to the role of science and the findings of the best science that we have out there. We refer to it in decisions. There's no reason why it shouldn't be a more integrated part of the process. Those affected by the climate crisis the most should have an outsized role in the process. They should be able to provide constructive inputs throughout the 2 weeks, not just marginalized to the pavilions or side inputs, but really having consultations with the presidency throughout the 2 weeks about their concerns and how they feel we can ultimately reach the objectives of the convention. And these reforms that I've just outlined, again, just taken by the presidency, they're not going to fix everything, but they should be put out there publicly. It shouldn't just be, we shouldn't look back after 2 weeks and say, oh, actually, the presidency followed these things. If they put it forward publicly, then you will find that it has that advocacy hook for civil society throughout the conference, that it establishes these norms and sets a precedent for what others should do. Puts the world on notice that this is what a proper, ambitious, and trustworthy COP president looks like. And like I said, this is just one of many proposals. Its effectiveness and its enforceability entirely lies on watchdogs and self-reporting, and it doesn't do anything to prevent other parties from forming their delegations how they would choose or bringing any representatives on their badge. But what it does do is harness the power of the COP presidency in a series of aspects of reform, and primary among those are the relationship that a president has with vested interests. It's a process that is often slow and cumbersome and technical, but we feel like this is a valuable ambition tool as part of a larger toolkit that can really push forward ambition in this process. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. And actually, I have follow-up questions for what Professor Yunao also given. Because the previous outlining projected content come out on the report, I wanted to ask Professor Yunao one question to us. Professor, how can we build such a multi-data content? And this depends on how solely it will ordering maintain all event, but how to really build service on type of the audience. Everything.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, and for the first thing is that the regionalization is very important because they saw this Asia race, Asia or whatever. So understanding that regional has a different view and they can talk and they can make something discussion, big discussion. So, and instead of, so mentioned by effort is cumbersome, everything has to be in the 1 year basis. I think that's really too much for the one who trying to resolve discussion. So, meeting that maybe not only this regionalization, but also the discipline, science, and implementation, adaptation, the litigation. I think that's just like a regular one. Then they making this every year, they becoming this combining with all things and stuff.
Okay, that's what's saying. And one question for Ethan. Ethan, what do you think of the mechanism that would strengthen the role of the ones and improve to?
I don't know about mechanism, but we find ourselves here this week with a huge gap in NDC ambition. And in fact, it's a primary part of the consultations that the presidency has been hosting all week, has been responding to the NDC ambition gap, put forward an agenda item put forward by AOSIS. I don't know whether the correct way to go about this is to say, go back to your capitals and spend another 2 years redoing your NDC. they just spent 2-3 years doing it. This is not an easy process. It's an intergovernmental process. It goes through bureaucracy. But I do feel like there are areas where non-state and subnational action can help a country overachieve their NDC. I don't think that all of that action has been captured in an NDC at a national level. So how can we go about actually getting that ambition realized? I think it should be encouraged that it should be included in an NDC. If you look at Canada's NDC, for example, they actually have annexes from each province and territory as to what that province and territory feels like they could contribute to the larger NDC. And I think that's a great practice.
Yeah.
I think that there are ways to host dialogues and even summits with non-state actors where you are showcasing that ambition so that it's out in the open, so that others can learn from it. It's not just isolated into your country. But if Indonesia's subnational and non-state actors are doing great work, then other countries should hear about that. And they should hear about that in a facilitated process. Those are two examples, I think, that potentially we could help start unlocking the ambition from non-state actors.
Okay, thank you so much. So thank you so much for having us today. And then thank you for our speaker and to everyone who today. I might say that the team that was still hold, still we have still each other. Then open cup to the another than it was the normal process that the level of treating the measurable life. Ground in societies, no harms us, and having out inclusive partnerships. On behalf of the final John Burton Revolution, thank you for being with us. I enjoy the last we talk at the meeting of the meeting and hope to be there. I'm General Gadawat. Thank you also the student. Engage.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.